you so much for joining us for today's LDNY Entrepreneurial Roundtable discussion on the keys to successful visual branding. I'm Penny Stankiewicz. I'm the chair of the Entrepreneur Committee, and I'm also an entrepreneur myself. So all of these topics are of interest to me, and I hope that you get something wonderful out of them. We've planned a vibrant discussion, but we'd love to address as many of your questions as possible. So please put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to weave them in as we go or address them at the end of the program. Excuse me, our panel for today is packed with creative industry experts, each with vast experience working with brands at all levels of development, helping them to reach a larger audience and ultimately to grow their businesses, because that's what this is all about in the end. I've already learned so much from them, and I hope that you will too. I'm going to introduce our panel now. Jordan Buntain is the Chief Creative Director of Buntain Partners, or self-described ex-madman. With more than 25 years of world-class advertising experience, Jordan has helped to mold the messages of brands big and small, created campaigns with clients such as Coca-Cola, Volkswagen, Microsoft, and Mazda, and has done some of that at the top agencies, including CP&B, Gray, and AKQA. He now leads Buntain Partners, a collection of remote, internationally awarded ad nerds who know that creativity can fix any business problem. Welcome, Jordan Buntain.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Dame Michelle Lawton, who is the founder of of Joyful Plate, a brand strategy consultancy that celebrates the joy of food and beverages and what they bring to our everyday lives. Her 20+ years of experience have garnered her a vast array of bold name clients, including Procter & Gamble, Pepper Farm, and Lawton. As Senior VP of Design Intelligence, which, by the way, Michelle, is the coolest job title ever, Design Intelligence. Michelle's worked along industry giants such as with Debbie Millman, refreshing some of the world's most iconic brands such as Campbell's Soup, Twizzlers. Throughout, I'm there. Through Joyful Plate, Michelle now uses that experience to support and develop the message of brands at all sizes and stages.
Thank you
Welcome,
so
Michelle.
much, Penny. It's great to be here with everyone.
And our final, but not least, what is up with me today? Jill, never mind, I'll tell you later. Jill Allyn Peterson. Jill is the creative director of Visual Aid Society. She holds degrees from the San Francisco Art Institute and the Rhode Island School of Design. She's taught graphic design at the City University of New York, and she's also been a visiting lecturer at American University, Syracuse, and Harvard. Pretty fancy. Through her work in graphic design, she strives to bring harmony, clarity, and delight to initiatives that increase awareness, justice, and education. Jill's built a successful career in social impact, working with clients who challenge the status quo. Welcome, everyone, and welcome to all of our guests for visual branding. We're going to start now with our first slide, which is from Michelle Lawton. From Jill. Ooh, not like I didn't just go over this. We're going to start now with our first slide from Jill, and we're going to start talking about our brand purpose and our identity. So, Michelle, your specialty is strategy. So what's the first thing that we have to think about before we start to really develop a brand's visual identity?
Well, design strategy is that space between business and creative. And I love working with people like Jill because frustrated creative, you are able to, as a team, develop the vision for the brand. So it's thinking about what's happening in culture, it's thinking about the competition, and it's coming up with a point of difference for the brand.
Forgive me for a second, Michelle. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Larea, this should be still Jill's slides. Slide 1. Anyway, so vision for brands, Michelle.
Right.
Visions for
right.
brands. How do we do that?
I often in my work with experts like Jill who bring the visual to life. And so my job on design strategy is to take all the information that you learn from the client in terms of the product and their purpose and their story, and then develop a first stage where you set the blueprint for the brand. So it's taking into consideration what's happening in culture, the competition, and develop some insights and hypotheses that you can tease out in research eventually into developing into branding. I'm going to turn it over to Jill because I know you would love to talk about this whole process.
Sure, thanks. So I see myself kind of in the middle of this diagram with brilliant people like Michelle and Jordan all around. And Jordan had asked when we were meeting prior to this, like, what are some of the nightmares that pop up for me as a designer? And I think they mostly revolve around when clients don't know this first part in the market research. Who are you and who are you talking to? If you dive into a visual branding process and you don't really know those answers, you're going to be spinning your wheels a whole bunch because you'll be driven by like your personal tastes, by kind of anxieties about not really understanding who your customer is and who you're talking to. And I've seen it happen so many times where we get through the process and then, you know, we want to start back at square one because we forgot about this whole other set of concerns. So really having this market research and the strategy going into the branding process makes it just, it's not always smooth sailing, but it takes out a lot of the bumps in the road. And I think beyond that, this is tied into that, is when you're going into a visual branding process, knowing not only who are you and who you're talking to, but also who needs to sign off on this. Like, who do you need to bring into that brainstorming, creative, pre-branding process so that you don't get to the end and realize, oh, there's this like really important voice that we left out of this conversation. So that's where to start, I think. And then you see testing on the end where you're just going back and forth. And I think Jordan can speak to this as well, as you start with an initial brand and then 2 years down the road, 5 years, et cetera. How are you going to evolve this brand?
Yeah, definitely. I'll jump in there really quickly, actually. Is sort of one thing I want to be very specific too about when you say who are you? That sounds kind of broad. Like, what is that, right? It's sort of, I would say that when you figure out who are you, you have to figure out whether you are probably the cheapest in the marketplace. And depending on what your marketplace is, it could be local, could be regional, it could be statewide. If you're going national, that's another whole ball of wax you got to play with. But are you the cheapest? Are you the funniest? Are you the fastest? I could take pizza as an example. Back in the old days, you had Papa John's was the best ingredients. Pizza Hut was the most value. Domino's was the best delivery. Little Caesars was slices. They all know exactly who they are. So knowing who you are exactly down to exactly that one little bullet point is where the starting point is. And then also being able to prioritize those other things you want to talk about with weighted variables so that you're able to then say, at what point can we kind of shut this down? Because at some point you're going to get into a very general, large, too many options kind of world. And that's not great for creativity. And when you say, who are you talking to, know that person down to their age, down to where they live, you think, how many kids do they have, what kind of car do they drive, so that then at the very end of the day, you're still going to probably be talking to, at the end of the day, a 5-year, 10-year window outside of that, plus or minus, and other people are going to come in too. But by taking that one person, you're going to give guys, Jill, you're going to give her right away. She's going to know exactly who that person is. And she's also probably going to know what brands they already like and can kind of ping off that even a little bit when she's in her creativity mode.
You, Jordan, many, many years ago, you'd said something to me: if you're talking to everyone, you're talking to no one. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means? Like, when we're identifying this person that we're talking to, right? I can't say I have a custom cake business. I don't make cakes for everyone, right? I make cakes for one, maybe two types of clients, right?
Right when you said that, I have just these memories hitting me in the face, and it's horrible. I see this happen a lot in small business where you have no money and you shouldn't be talking about a million things, and it's just purely out of just probably not going through the process. But I do see it in big business. I see brands at Procter and Gamble doing it all the time, and Unilever, like where they just, no one wants to commit to something. And I get that sometimes committing is scary, but if you were to take something like a 7th generation brand, which is under Unilever, they committed to being the environmental brand. I'm picking also things here in Burlington, Vermont, like Ben and Jerry's. They were the textual, funky brand. Magic Hat at the time, they were this funky craft beer. They wanted to be the number one for 5% of the market. They knew exactly what they were. So when you start making those choices, you're able, it sounds crazy. Like a lot of times people think that a blank canvas is a good thing, and it's not. It absolutely isn't for a creative. When you have very hard, fast, road, these lines, it gives me a place where to go. And it also gives me a place where I can go against. Because a lot of times stuff we hear about things like disruption, digital disruption, or just disruption in the marketplace, sometimes doing the exact opposite of what this person likes might be the way to go. So, being able to do that kind of stuff, that's the why I say talking to everyone, you're going to talk to no one, because no one's really going to latch on to that one thing that they care about and that you're good at. And you could be talking to, the person who's buying a Tesla is not the same person who's buying a Ford. So by trying to talk to everyone, you're talking to neither of those people. So it's kind of a waste. It's a big waste of money at the end of the day.
Yeah, and there's a great opportunity to make a difference. Last night I was just flipping through, looking at different brands, and you think about gin. Hendrick's Gin years ago developed this incredible story that still is really impactful today, and they did it through illustration and coming up with characters. They've line extended actually, and just recently developed Neptunia. So they're playing again with this whole idea of imagination and taking it to mermaids and Neptunes, and very different point versus, for example, Tanqueray. Tanqueray is the quintessential English gin, very highly branded, very polished, and so. Two different takes, two great tastes. I'd take a gin and tonic from either one of them, but two different ways to go, and that's what branding is all about.
And Jill, in terms of knowing your client, that's going to change all your design choices, right? If you're creating something for a mom of 3 who drives a minivan in New Jersey, your visual language is going to be very different from, a Tribeca mom of 1 who never drives, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think this process, what Jordan said about a blank canvas, it like sent a little shiver up my spine, because it's like this whole process is about kind of making tangible what's going on in all of our heads. So a lot of times someone could say like, yeah, make it modern. No idea what that means. It means different things to different people. So putting the time in to the process will just result in so much more specificity. And I think in storytelling, in branding, like specificity is what makes the day.
Absolutely. Jordan, I wanted to also talk about your car analogy. It was very helpful to me when I was starting my business. You asked me what kind of car I imagined I am. And that was so useful to me because there's so much nuance in there that you can really find yourself and your client by kind of starting to identify that. Do you want to tell us some more about that idea?
Yeah, so this little exercise does 2 things. It sort of helps you figure out who you are, and sometimes you need to call bullshit on that. I'll tell a little story after that, because you may think
I'm not
you know
a Ferrari?
who you are. No, yeah, right. Oh yeah. Well, I'll tell you really quickly. Actually, you know how many people when I've taken, they say, "Oh, we're Tesla," right? And they haven't innovated or changed the world in any way, shape, or form. So it's like, why are you Tesla? It's like, well, I think the car is sexy. I'm like, okay, so that's a different thing, whereas like what it really does though, this exercise is that I find, especially when you get into bigger organizations and at C-level who don't, or sorry, not C-level, enterprise level, where the C's aren't really talking to each other all that much, and the communication isn't flowing down, this behemoth, is that by everyone sort of hearing what kind of car you think that your company is. So I'll go around a table with little pieces of paper and say, what kind of car company do you think you are? And everyone will write down something. And of course, a lot of people pick their own cars, but like someone will pull out something, that, well, I think we're Ford because, you know, we're time tested, we're heritage, we're, you know, we're a dog, you know, stuff like that. No, kidding. They'll also pull out things like Tesla, as I said, because they think they're the most innovative, or I'm trying to think about BMW comes up a lot too, and definitely Volkswagen for quirkiness. But what you start to realize is that everyone within the company is thinking different things of what they're about. And that's a bad thing. Because what happens a lot of time is that when you do your branding work is that everyone's thinking something different. Everyone needs to be on the same page, understanding what is the one or two things that we're focusing on. Like we are Acura because we are the cheaper end of the luxury market, but we're still slick and innovative because they have, say, the NSX, or I think maybe their best-selling car is maybe the RDX, which is a smaller, you know, SUV or something like that. Whatever that is, like everyone needs to be on the same page, because what happens, and Jill knows this, you know, this again, just here comes the chill part that really creeps you out, is that like your deck goes away to all these people, and then everyone starts talking about it and sees it in completely different ways. And then it suddenly becomes back to the CEO or the CMO who's making these decisions, and it ends up being just this cluster of all these weird things where everyone's not using the same filters. So by going through and saying we're this car and seeing who's different, and then trying to get on the same page of why we're this car, you know, it's great. And cars are great because we all know cars. We see these car ads all the time. We see them on the street. We know what we feel about them. Alcohol is a really good way. Everyone kind of understands alcohol. Beers are also sometimes good at keeping it that way. Sometimes stuff that we see in the grocery stores can also work, you know, but cars are pretty easy to do at the end of the day.
I like the idea of dog breeds. I'll try that sometime.
Yeah, exactly.
Dog breeds is a great one. What I liked so much about the car, and then we're going to switch topics on this, but what I liked so much about that was that idea of the Acura or the Lexus, because it also helped me define my client, right?
Absolutely.
Like you also put ideas like who's going to drive this car that I am, and it really helped me refine that personality and how much money they would be willing to spend with me and what kind of attention they would require from me. And it was more than just a branding process then. It was really I was able to like really hone in on who I was. And so I thought that was a really useful trick that you taught me many years ago.
Yeah. Hotels could be a really good one too. You know, I mean, if you were given $300 and you could choose any hotel, where would you stay? And some people are going to go for the Ritz-Carlton because they want all the amenities. And then other people are going to want to go like, you know, out back in a tent, you know, with maybe services and tech. So all of these exercises are so great at knowing yourself.
What else is really great about that idea too is that if you want to be the Ritz-Carlton, then you know you have to offer the amenities. It also kind of can start to tell you how you'll have to perform in the environment in order to be that. So again, this comes down to studying. More
importantly, what amenities you're not going to talk about too. Yeah. Like that's one big thing. It actually tells you the hardest part is figuring out what to throw out. And because like I would all the time be talking with people like in the Lexus market, and they would say, "Oh, we got to say it has an AM/FM stereo." I'm like, really? That doesn't need to be on the page on that print ad that's costing you, $100,000 for this run. We can take that out because people are going to assume that. But you'd be amazed at like just all the things that if you don't have that, how wrong you can go.
And then imagining also one final point on this. This is where business and innovation comes in. Look at Airbnb. How incredible. You can download an app and you could be a superhost overnight. And they've fulfilled a real need, particularly during the pandemic. But now Airbnb is owning the space, and hotels are looking to them for ways to differentiate with experiences, et cetera. So, I mean, branding and business is just a phenomenal space to envision, the future.
Absolutely. All right, let's switch now and let's talk a little bit about how we get there visually. Michelle, you've provided us with a couple of mood boards. We're going to look at the first one now. So before you go to an ad company, a graphic designer, you have to start doing some visual homework of your own, right? How do we start to refine what our visual identity is going to look like? How do we do the homework to get started?
Right, right. Well, all of us on this panel work with mood boards and develop this space. And, this is where design strategy is actually the most, I think, one of the most exciting places in design, because it's the place of possibilities. This is where, you don't have to worry about getting this much copy on a package or an app that's this small, right? This is all the potential. So we could all read these words and come up with different images in our mind of where this brand can go. This is a mood board that was developed for an urban retail concept in New York. And what I think is really fascinating is that, it balances the urban feel, the grittiness, frankly, of what our experience has been like here in New York for the past couple of years, but with this pop of color and hope. So in a mood board is a succinct combination of images, textures, colors that begin to tell the story of the brand. And it's a way for the designer, like if Jill and I were on a team, we would work on this together to play back to the client that we have understood them, which is so important, not only for setting off the whole process in the correct way and doing some of the heavy lifting up front, but for us to develop trust and rapport with the client. In this case, they chose very carefully iconography, language, and I thought it was really fascinating, like literally swiped across this woman's face to showcase that, we're always plugged in. So very high tech version of this mood board. But then if you flip to the next mood board 2, we're talking about unplugging. So this is all about, relaxing and having a creative outlet and putting the phones to the side and, bringing in nature and choosing some natural colors, but then, accentuating it with pops of positivity. And so, the great news is, you could do this yourself, flip through magazines, you could go online and just start to develop swipe. You could put this into a Pinterest. This is a really great exercise if you're branding yourself as a chef or a restaurant or for a big business. Now, obviously, if this is like for a very big brand, this is really important work because you have to use this across multiple touch points. And so, believe it or not, on a big global project, you could spend probably too much time, but entrepreneurs could, kind of shortcut it and simplify it so that you can have that first step and be on your way.
And I think this is a good point, because if you are a small business and I'm not at the stage where I can bring in a team like the three of you, then I have to do some of this legwork on my own. And I think that people who open a business have a superpower, right? But it's probably that business, it's maybe not this. So in trying to start to stretch yourself and find this visual identity, or at least be able to educate yourself so you can have a very good conversation with, you're still going to hire a graphic designer, right? Most likely. You're still going to bring someone to do your website or those kinds of materials that you're going to need. Starting a Pinterest board, I like to tell my students to just collect images. Don't be discerning about it, just collect them. And then after a while of collecting, you'll be able to look at that board and start to see themes and threads. And that can help you start to refine it. If a certain color keeps coming up over and over and over again, like I look at this mood board and I get a total 60s, late 60s, 70s vibe, right? And so you'll start to pull those threads out of it so that you can start to have an understanding of what you might like your brand to look like before. You can't go to somebody like Jill, for example, and say, I have no idea what I want this to be. You tell me, right? You have to have some place to start.
One word that Michelle used actually is really good and it's really cheap and it's a great way to go. It's swipe. So, and we do this in like the big, Madison Avenue agencies too. So there's 2 times. So I will bring, say, the brief and the business problem and everything to a design team. Within the house, we have 100 designers, right? And so I'll show up with a bit of swipe. And swipe is something I basically printed off the internet. Now, I've picked the swipe specifically, though. It's not going like, I like this color, or I like, I thought this was pretty, or I kind of like this brand. It's, I picked this because, and that's a big thing. Like, I'm picking this because I picked this color because earth tones. And I think that we're the brand that's down to earth. And that's how also the copy is going to be, I think. I feel like that's who we are. Or, you know what, we're great at meatballs, so I grabbed this Italian thing, or whatever it is. It's like, it's just things that are speaking to you, but they got to have a variable attached to it of why it exists and why you brought it in. It can't just be like, I kind of like this, you know? And then what happens is that then, so I'll come in with something saying, here's where my brain is at, you know, and I'll show some of the designers of things I'm just thinking about that came out of, you know, clients may have said in a meeting or something like that. And then they'll bring swipe back. We basically have a swipe party. So about a couple days later, they'll come back with like, you know what, I heard you said there, and I don't like this. This is terrible because here's why, A, B, and C. And I go, oh, you're right. And then they'll start showing me, how about we start going down this avenue? I like this, this, and this. And here's something I dummied up, but you know, and it's just this sort of free flow of ideas. But using swipe and things that you can just print off the internet when you feel it or like it, that's like, I don't know what it is, tactile. That works.
It is,
versus
and you know what? Even though I often work in this, you know, big picture upfront world, I'm a huge believer that you could find that little symbol that could make the whole brand. You know, I mean, there could be genius in that little piece of swipe that Jordan mentioned. So, you know, just trust yourself, and as you collect these images and combinations, you'll start to see patterns, and it could really make a difference and help you to develop something truly unique.
And I also think that sometimes people have a challenging time putting into words why they picked something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're all creative, and so it's our job to put ideas into words and then convey them to other people. But sometimes just something that resonated with you and you're struggling to find the words. And so through this process, and as you edit it, right, as you take away what's not working and then refocus on what is, you'll start to find why that thing resonated to you. I totally hear you, Jordan, but I don't know that everybody's going to start from why, because I think that's the harder question to answer, right? Sometimes it just evokes a feeling in you, and then you want to also evoke that feeling elsewhere in your brand.
Yeah, it's hard to get that feeling out. If you do, yeah, like to Jill, when someone brings you something, let's say, like, and they say, I don't know why I like that. Is that helpful for you to at least see it and then maybe start trying to start pulling stuff out of it? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think seeing this, like, if you close your eyes and someone says, I want my brand to be relaxing, it can go in all these other directions. And then if you open your eyes and see this, it's like, okay, we have a starting point. And then I can ask, like, okay, is there something about that line that you like? Well, no, it's not about the line. Okay, is there something about that it's just black and white? And like, oh, okay, yeah, it's just simple, you know, and then descriptive words start to flow a little bit more. So yeah, it's a totally good starting point.
Yeah, it becomes therapy sometimes, you know, when, right? I mean, I know when I was developing Joyful Plate, I developed the name and the brand, and it took me a while to get to that icon. And we ended up with, you know, a very subtle little lift that was both a smile and a plate. And thankfully, I was working with a designer who really knew me, one of my best friends, and because she was listening, because, you know, she really heard what I was looking for, but who I was, she brought it to life.
Absolutely.
Definitely sleep on it. Because sometimes back when I was at this crazy agency in Boulder, Colorado, we had the phrase, you just had a braingasm. What it is you got excited. You saw something that you liked, and then you saw it, and then you're like, I nailed it, I've cracked it. And then you wake up the next morning, you're like, that was terrible. You know, so before you execute and start going down a rabbit hole, like, sleep on it a couple of days. That's part of the process. Everyone gets it. It's just recognizing what it is.
And when we look at these mood boards now, we see these beautiful ideas of what we want our brand to be or what our brand is now. But Jordan, we talked about a concept of 2, 5, 10 thinking that I think is very important to start to weave into this conversation, because here we are now, but is our brand going to stay the exact same for the future?
Right. Yeah. So let's say you're a local brand who wants to be national in 10 years, right? That's your goal. You want to scale. That's the job. So you may want to look at, you know, who am I going to be in 2 years? But more importantly, who am I going to be in 10 years? Because if I do, say I'm a pizza category, and now I got to show up against Domino's, Pizza Hut, and, you know, and Papa John's and Little C. Well, we know those 4 colors already. You know, although Papa John's has kind of changed a little red recently. If you start watching television, that was within the past year. So I'm interesting. They used to be green, right? Because they were for better ingredients, and red, value for Pizza Hut, right? And it's kind of like hot now and, you know, more for your money. Domino's has always been blue, and then you got Little Caesars is orange. So if you're picking colors and you want to be national in 10 years, like, you better go with maybe purple or, you know, something else, because when you get there, you want to make sure that you look different from these guys, because that's how people are picking things. But the 2, 5, 10, kind of, if we go back to sort of, you don't have to go back to this first slide, but what also kind of needs to be in the very beginning is, who is your competition? Because you are fighting against those people, right? So it's war. It's fun war. That's why we do it, right? But branding against these people is going to be key. So how are you different from them? How are you the same from them? How is, you know, you look, and this is what Jill's thing is, like, she'll go through your website and decide what the flow of colors are to when people are actually making a purchase, you know, why that should exist. So in your first 2 years, it's always good. It's good to always be doing your 2, 5, 10. So, because it gives you who you want to be, but like, 2 years is something like, you can create a brand and you could change it in 2 years and be fine with completely changing it again, right? But if you start looking at it in 5 years, will that brand last? Should you scale to the size that you want to be? So you go from a regional Vermont creamery to Cabot cheese, which is now much more New England, right? Okay, now 10 years, I want to be a national brand. Okay, so now I'm Cabot cheese. Can I be, with my branding the way it is now, still be relevant in that space, or am I going to have to change? Now, in the first year, you know, will that matter? No. But is the exercise a good idea? Probably, if that's what your ideas are and that's what you're thinking, because to go back and change all that stuff later on down the line, you can do it, but you're going to have to change letterhead. You know, like, everyone knows, even just in the small business, like, you got to change everything, your website. And it's a real pain. If you have an idea of how you want to scale, that's a nice process to go through. 2, 5, and 10, and who's going to be my competition along that ride.
Yeah, and you know, one thing that I'm kind of blown away by in that 2, 5, 10 exercise, important doing the thinking up front and understanding the competition and the relevance, but also just know that things are changing every day. I mean, look at us, like, we are on a Zoom. And a couple of years ago, we would have been on a Skype. And, you know, and we're all sitting, watching, binging on Netflix. And, you know, I mean, we would have been talking 5 years ago about Apple. You know, every conference we were on, everyone was talking about Apple or Samsung. And, you know, they're all legacy brands, but the environment is just changing at such a rapid pace that, I mean, it's important to get the brand right, but also pay attention, because that next brand's coming in, and it's TikTok.
So it's interesting, Michelle, you mentioned brands that I have intimate knowledge with, Netflix, Apple, and you think about how Apple changed its visual branding over time. I mean, talk about a nimble company, right? I don't know if there's a more nimble company, but the core never changed. Core, get it out there. But
good one, Penny.
Thank you. But it still became like something that they were able to change. So understanding that these are one of these like businessy things that makes me a little crazy, because you simultaneously have to project the future, have to keep space open for the future, and allow for change at the same time. So I don't know if there is any, but do any of you have any insight onto a thinking process of how to envision a brand that has room to grow? And also, never mind, go ahead, Jordan, go.
Always know your demographic. That's going to tell you exactly who you're going to be. Apple's for the crazy people. They've always been for the crazy people. By crazy, they mean creative, the ones who are going to try something new, something nuts. So when they come out with something new and something nuts, you're not surprised. That's who they are as a brand, right?
Remember the Apple, Microsoft debate?
Oh yeah, all the Vista stuff. Oh yeah, and all that stuff was amazing, you know. By doing that and just being true to that person who got you there, who got you your start. I mean, that's you know, and you can change it from maybe demographics also to a little bit of the psychographics. So what that means is, like, sure, the average Apple buyer back in the day would have been probably a 24-year-old, you know, nerd sitting in his house or whatever. But the crazy person touches that part of his psychology that says, you know, I'm not listening to, you know, my parents and going to, you know, accounting school or be a lawyer like that. I want to go into this thing called computers, right? And so that was like, that's the psychology, it's the creative. And so while, and also too, knowing your competition, Microsoft at that time was all about business. Right. It wasn't about creativity. It wasn't about, you know, they were trying to put the line for that Bill Gates was, you know, put a PC on every desk, right? Not Apple. Apple was, we're for the specific ones who change the world, right? And so knowing that, having that psychology and having that brand as who you are, that's a lot like Volkswagen kind of likes to do that a little bit too. I think they like to play in that space and visually. That yeah, you can now start making products based on that because they expect it from you. They're not surprised. They say, oh, that fits within the Apple brand. They're going to make a car. No one's going to be surprised when Apple makes a car because it's kind of crazy.
Absolutely. And Jill, how do you create space so that a logo can be updated and changed without being overly dated?
Well, I was just thinking about that in terms of the Apple logo and remembering how it used to have like rainbow stripes within the apple, and now it's just like, oh, like a glowing white apple. And I think it really speaks to like the strength and simplicity of that symbol. So like it's constructed in a way that's like visually balanced and memorable. So you can put weird things inside of it, like stripes, or take everything out and you still know what it is. So I think that really speaks to like paring back. We're bombarded with so much visual information every day, every moment, like millions of things coming in. So taking away is probably your best move rather than adding on. And I think this speaks to that process where, like, if you have everyone in your company thinking of yourself as a different car, it reminds me of like building a website where there's all these people that want their, like the people in the development department, like, oh, make sure to put the donation button in it. And like that has to be on the front page. And so like every little segment of the company wants their thing on the home page. And it really ruins the customer experience because they don't even know what they're looking at. I think the same thing sort of goes for a logo, and a lot of anxiety people have when designing a logo is like, but it doesn't communicate this little part of why we're so special.
Right.
And it becomes like this gypsy wagon that has like everything, like it has to carry every single thing you are from place to place, when really it needs to just communicate the core as simply and efficiently as it possibly can.
It's so interesting because I was the whole time I'm picturing Apple, right? Before Apple, an apple was an apple. Or maybe it was the Beatles production company, right? But at the end of the day, it was just an apple. And now that apple carries all of the things you're talking about. It does. It implies all of those things because they put all that work in and then they simplify. And isn't that, I mean, obviously we're not, maybe, you know, I named my first company Realm of the Senses Custom Cakes. I'm not getting to that kind of simplicity anytime soon, okay? But isn't that what we're all sort of looking for? That one little thing that makes us, you know, a prince, you know, identified by one word, one image, that ultimately can pack all of that meaning in it as the brand identity develops and as your relationship with your consumer develops.
And as Jordan said, over time, there's an expectation of what services you will get from that brand. And so for me as an entrepreneur, Apple is like my lifeline. Like, I love the Apple Care people, like family. Right. And so, you know, and there's an expectation that, you know, when I go to the Apple store and I'm at the Genius Bar, that brand is going to carry me through. Just like, you know, now I might want, you know, a boutique espresso, but when I'm in the airport and I'm delayed at my flight and I could just sit at Starbucks with my cappuccino, I know I'm going to get it. I know what it's going to taste like, and I know that it's going to be delivered on time. So brands, that's what a brand is all about. It's a trust mark.
Absolutely. Let's talk about a specific brand now. Michelle, you brought us a couple of slides from a company that you worked with, Jacob's Pickles.
Yes, I had an office on the Upper West Side for over the past 10 years, and I was very, very lucky to work with Jacob himself of Jacob's Pickles through our mutual charity, the West Side Campaign Against Hunger. And so Jacob had developed a very young entrepreneur, this concept of beer, biscuits, and pickles. So who would have ever imagined that combination, right? And he had a background in design. And so he had designed this logo himself quite brilliantly. It became, you know, in 2 years, one of the most successful restaurants in New York City. So I was just so fortunate. My team and I were the agency of record for many years, and you know, we're still friends today. So, you know, this was a big responsibility for me to help Jacob's restaurant thrive even more. And, being in New York City, there's pickles everywhere, right? In the Lower East Side, and pickles have this fantastic historical story. But as I thought about it, there was an opportunity to create pickles for a new generation and to bring that, urban sense of fun and hip experience to it. So we worked on, again, the visual and verbal toolkit through mood boards to come up with a look and feel to communicate, this is home cooked Southern food, but with a New York twist, artisanal beer and grits. So these postcards are still available today. And we then went on a couple of years later to develop a new restaurant. So if you go to the next slide. So Jacob is a huge visionary, and he had this idea to develop another restaurant within the pickle hospitality family. And so he made my job easy for me because he developed the name. And so he had this name, Maison Pickle, in his head. So we spent a lot of time talking about, okay, where do we place the emphasis in the logo? And this is the hierarchy exercise that we typically go through. And so we had to decide, how do we communicate Maison versus pickle? And so, of course, it was all about the pickle. Within a family of brands, sometimes these brands interact as siblings. So if you can imagine, Jacob's Pickles as kind of the younger, fun kid who maybe went to Germany and tried some beer and loves great music, and loves fried chicken. His older brother, Maison Pickle, might have studied abroad in Paris, and he wants to, eat a French dip sandwich, and he might have a cocktail or two. So we had to figure out a way for these two brands to live within this family, but be, brothers. And so we added, a bit of style with cocktails and French dip. And we had a lot of fun on this project with the designers, just coming up with different situations. Like, who would have ever thought, the pickle as the boxing match, or, women dipping into a French dip. And so, this is just like the beauty and the fun of having a brand like this, frankly, that, I just said it best before, like this blank canvas to do anything. But, when you have a client who has dreamt about this restaurant, it's so important to get it right. So we took quite a bit of time to get to this place. And then eventually that led to a whole creative for the website. So if you click on the website, you could go to either Jacob's Pickles or Maison Pickle. And now there are many other iterations, other restaurants. And I think he has a new beer coming out too. So check that out.
I love this. It gives me a feeling like I know exactly what I'm going to get. I know the vibe. It's going to be a little bit upscale, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be a little bit tongue in cheek, right? And it's all in here. And let's just talk about the challenges when you are going to expand to a second product under a current brand, or expand to a second location that's going to be somewhat different, that isn't going to be exactly the same thing in another place.
Sure, yeah, I can speak to that. So the first thing that made you famous and was able to make the second thing is probably going to be a very core part of what the second one is. So, people are coming to you, they'll know, they'll have something going in often. Maybe if it's not, in a restaurant scenario, it might be maybe locals who are going, so maybe they haven't seen the other one on the Lower East Side, so that might change it a little bit. Depends on what the product is. But let's say if you do have a core from your one brand that shows up in the next, right? And that they kind of share a little bit, but this one might be just a little bit different. It's not too bad to say brought to you by the people who did this, because you've done a lot of work building this, right? So like Katz's Deli, if they had, pickles brought to you by Katz's Deli, you remember Katz's Deli, and you go, oh, wait a minute, that's the pickle that goes with that sandwich. That sandwich is what got you there. So knowing that, but there's expectations with a brand prior. So if you can kind of, you can build another arch of that, but sort of almost like a subhead under a headline, of like brought to you by these people. Sometimes that can be helpful to like, remind people of what you're getting yourself into. And you'll know it's a luxury brand. You'll know it's it's sort of like, and this sounds, okay, so Mazda, they're known for the Miata. That's what they did for years, right? So even in the, and this is a bit of a stretch, let's be honest, but I wrote it on a huge billboard in Times Square. We had, the minivan with the soul of a sports car. So it's another brand within the Mazda window, but we're still talking about the Miata at the end of the day. I don't even show the Miata, but when you know Mazda, you're talking about, oh, that Miata that I know made you iconic.
Yeah, I think it's a choice. I think it's a choice. We talked a lot about, whether to link the two. Sometimes restaurateurs want to have these independent restaurants. Going back to hotels, look at the Hilton or the Marriott. There are variations of Marriott Suites, but then again, Marriott has all these other sub-brands through that whole merger with Starwood, where they want to come out with boutique hotels and not name Marriott, but still offer that global service. So yeah, it's always a business choice.
You'll often see by Marriott underneath it, just so you know that there's a brand underneath it that you trust, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe a little easier for a larger company too. I think
Yeah.
a smaller company is going to have a little bit more of a challenge kind of bridging that over. Great. Okay. Jill also did some wonderful slides so that we can start to think about logos and colors and all the details of design and how they impact us. So we're going to go back to Jill's.
Great. Yeah, I think just riffing off of what we just saw with the
Next
pickle
one.
company with Mason.
Sorry,
Pickle.
Larea, page 3. Thank you.
I think that just speaks to the importance of unity across your brand, having a really tight brand. So whether it shows up in the the signage outside the store, or it's a trucker hat, or it's an ad or a card that you take away, you all know that it belongs, that all of it belongs to the same brand. And so I'll just take you through kind of the nuts and bolts of it. So you get an understanding of how you construct this brand and all the different parts. And I invite Michelle and Jordan to jump in with any anecdotes or interesting tidbits as I go along. But this is my world. This is the building blocks of a brand, starting with the logo. So as you can see here, like, you might say logo and think one thing, but there's all these different ways in which a logo can exist. It can have no mark, it can have a mark incorporated, it can have a separate mark and then the word, it can just be the bug, like the apple, like just the apple that you see on the computer. It can be stacked, it can be horizontal. And so I know a lot of times people going into a branding exercise when they're first starting out and maybe they don't have a ton of resources, just knowing how much goes into the creation of a brand is really important. And then thinking about how this is going to exist in the world. So you start off black and white, and you really want to make sure that there's contrast there, and then you start playing around with color. So we can move to the next slide. So typography is the next bit in this brand, and there's lots of different ways to think about it. We think of, if typography, it's like, okay, type, letters, there's different kinds of letters, I guess. Well, there's a few different categories we want to be thinking about. The font family is going to be either a serif or a sans serif. So serif has the little feet on it, and sans serif does not have the little feet. And I think going back to that idea of like, make it modern, what does that mean? One thing that like we can usually get at when someone says modern is leaning towards the sans serif. So you'll just notice that like serif has a slightly different feel than sans serif, or it can be a large difference depending on the typeface, but it'll communicate two totally different things. And to say it very simply, one can be a little more old-fashioned, one can be a little more forward-looking, but of course, this all depends on the actual typeface itself. So you'll make a decision around that. And then going into weight, we have light, regular, bold. There's also lots of sub-weights within that, but generally you could have a font that has a variety of different weights that gives you a bigger range to express your brand. You're going to think about, is it going to be all uppercase? Is it going to be sentence case? Is it all going to be lowercase? And then eventually, when we get through all of these different concerns, you'll think about size and pairing. So where will this type show up? It'll obviously be on a website, it'll be on business cards, maybe it's on t-shirts, hats, maybe it's actually on the front of the restaurant. There's lots of different concerns in terms of how you pair or combine the different weights, the different sizes, and also if you do a combination of, we have serif for the headline, or serif is in the logo itself, but we also use some sans serif fonts along the way. We can move to the next slide.
That was actually Maison Pickle, or Maison Pickle did that, right? That was an actual example of that, where the pickle itself was a sans serif font, and then actually the Maison wasn't. But nonetheless, the combination of the two different typefaces actually had a lot to say. No?
Yeah,
totally.
and I learned so much working with designers like Jill. In that upfront stage, a lot of times when we're looking at the range of type, you can go anywhere you want. You can go all caps and be empowering, right, and strong, or you can go lowercase, which is kind of of the moment, and communicate usefulness. So it really just depends on where you want to go. I mean, thinking about like Chobani, I was blown away that Chobani made a really revolutionary change pretty early in their evolution to, I think, Jill, it was sans serif, but it was upper and lower case, right? So that was, they pulled it off, but there was a lot of debate, about whether or not to make such a revolutionary change, but now we see it. And now it's like, it's always been that way.
Yeah, it's so funny because I can't even remember what it used to be, but I know that it changed. And even though it's been a few years, every time I see Chobani, I'm like, oh, it's so fresh and new.
Right.
And I think it's maybe a serif. I think there's little doodads, little feet on it. Because it has that kind of retro vibe too. But yeah, here's an example. So just a screenshot. I tried to use food brands for you all. Of combining serif and sans serif in type. So on their website, you'll see the top navigation bar uses a sans serif, so very clean, modern. And the headline, breakfast ideas, clean and modern sans serif. And then the body copy is a serif font. So you see, it might be a little hard to see, but I think you can tell, like getting the sense of it, that it has the little feet on it, slightly more old fashioned, if you will. Oh yeah, thanks for the zoom. So you can see here they're doing like a combination where sans serif and serif show up throughout the website, and it gives it a nice variation as you're going through. So you're not just kind of hit with all one type. And I think that's something to think about with branding and design in general, is just like giving people a break, like you want to speak really clearly, but you also want to vary it so that it's not like a foghorn of like, this is our style. Okay, on to the next slide. Great, so color is another component of the brand, and it usually has a primary palette and a secondary palette, and you can see that the sizes are bigger to indicate that most of the time we'll use these bigger circles for our main colors, and then the secondary palette shows up as accents. So they're not always there. They're not like these constant guides throughout the brand, but they're there to highlight something that you want to bring attention to, or again, vary it up and give people a break from the monotony of a brand palette. So I grabbed these. You can move to the next slide. I grabbed these from the Thrive Market website, and just a few screenshots to show you how there's consistency and variation. So if you have consistency that's like so rigid that you never vary, you're leaning towards boring or stifling, or people can tune you out. But if you're constantly changing up colors and everything, like sometimes we'll do the the headline in green. Sometimes we'll do it in blue. You need to give people guideposts along the way so that they always know where they are with a certain set of main colors. And then they can also have fun within that with the accent colors. And
take a step back just for 1 second, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Just one thing. For people who may have a small business and have never known or have never been given a brand book, this is what Jill's putting together. It's basically when you go to a graphic designer, you get a brand book that you can basically, I know a lot of people sometimes will use their cousin who knows a little bit of Photoshop. Like you can go and take this book that Jill's created and hand it off to them and say, use these colors, use these fonts, do not mess around, because when the visual identity breaks down, you're going to lose people. And then again, you're wasting money. So a great little thing that I'll tell you about how this happens. If someone clicks from a banner to the website and it looks different, you are automatically going to lose 50% of your people. Like that.
Wow.
They're gone. They just immediately think that I think I must have clicked on the wrong thing. Or say it goes from, even if it goes from your banner that looks like this to your website that currently looks like this, versus say a landing page that looks like the banner, you're going to lose people. So visual identity is a huge, huge thing. And that's why the brand book exists.
So also just coming back, forgive me, I'm not sure if it was Jill or Michelle, maybe Michelle said it's about trust, right? So that's kind of in practice how that trust is lost, because if you say you're one thing here and then you're something else, when they actually get there, on a psychological level, you're sending a message that you're not what you say you are.
It's consistency. Even if it's crappy, at least you're consistently crappy. I'll respect that and I'll click on that.
Yeah. And also, it's the old adage, like, honey, get the blue one. When you go to the supermarket and, you ask your husband to pick up, your favorite cereal. So it's trust, it's, psychological learning, it's shoppability. All these things matter.
And colors can mean so many different things.
Color,
that's Jill's
yes.
world. Yeah, color. Like color can mean all these different things.
Jordan's already talked about how color is going to be, and Michelle just said it too, get the blue one, or how the pizza companies are associated with color. But color also conveys meaning in and of itself, right? Yeah. So, what do you say, Jill, if the client comes to you, I want everything black. Everything's going to be black, or some version of that. I mean, how do you approach color in terms of also support your mission?
I think it's knowing what these colors mean, or I would just ask, why do you need it to be all black? Is your target market goth teen, or is it a very like high-end luxury kind of thing? Like we would get into the why, who are you talking to? And I think what all this brings up with consistency, and especially color, but all of these things and consistency, it's kind of an existential issue, because on one hand, yes, it's about trust, like, oh, they were purple yesterday and now they're green, but also like you just evaporate, like Jordan said, like if you lose 50% of the people because you don't look the same, it's like you just don't even exist. So I think that's why it's
trust, but to be honest, going back to what Jordan was saying, it's business. I mean, branding is business. And when I worked in market research, design, and intelligence, we would do like all these variations and test them in shelf sets to see which logo popped, which variation was easiest to find on the shelf out of, a football field of products. So,
absolutely. Go to the shelf and try and find Tide versus 7th generation. Just do that little exercise. You're going to find a Tide like that, Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
The idea of trust, sorry, never mind. Go ahead, Jill. I'll come back to it in a second. Jill, you were something going to say?
Oh, we could just move on to the next slide, but if you had something to say, Penny.
Lost it. Something else came up, but I lost it. Sorry. Go ahead and move on.
Okay, so another component is imagery. And so you might think like, okay, a photo is a photo is a photo, but I chose all these different food brands or food-oriented accounts, let's say, to show how different imagery can be conveyed. So at the top, we have a set of tacos that are photographed as though they're in a museum. It's almost like a work of art. Below that, you have Oreo cookies made into like a little world where I hope you can see, there's like tiny bicyclists and like a forest around them. So extremely playful approach. And And then in the middle and the top, we have, it's kind of like everyday life. Okay, this is like a photo, but it's like a little better than like a photo I just took, but it has that approachable feel of like, maybe I could have taken that photo. Maybe I know that guy. Very friendly without a lot of pretense. Whereas beneath that, we have quite a bit of that where it's like a very art directed, very intentional type of photo with lighting where the pieces are treated like a work of art. And then top right, it's kind of in between where it's supposed to feel like a real moment, but it's obviously a bit more elevated than that. It's a bit of like a fantasy world. Like I want to live in a place surrounded by these flowers, and that's how my breakfast goes in my dreams. And then below that, kind of going back to like real life, but even more gritty, some kind of filter there that takes us into like kind of like a cool or a vintage realm. And these are a few examples, but we could keep going and going. But just to show you, there's a variety of ways you could go with imagery. And this could also be a useful component of your brand book if you're going to be doing a lot of photography in your work, or using photography as a way to really differentiate yourself as a brand.
So there's logos, but there's also all of the content that you create and share with the world, right? And so keeping a consistent look and vocabulary with that is important as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we can think back to the Maison Pickles example where the imagery is so specific. It's black and white, it's old timey, and it's collaged in with an actual pickle, but that's also has a certain style to it.
Absolutely. Is there a last page? Is there a page 9?
Yeah, I think there's a page 9. So yeah, this hopefully brings it all together for you. There's more components to a brand book, but this is kind of the meat of it. You'll have your logo, you'll have your typography, you'll have your color and your imagery, and you can give this to a graphic designer and say, go for it. This is how it needs to look. And I personally love receiving brand books. It's really fun to just see how much work went into it and how specific it is. And it also makes my job really easy when someone's like, I need a social media post. Here's the brand book. It's like, it's the opposite of that blank canvas. So it's really fun to work with. And it's fun to, if you're worried about like, oh, if I get a designer to do this, then I'm going to need to have a designer all the time. The brand book really helps to be able to more easily get graphic design help without a huge commitment. And yeah, I don't know. Does anyone have anything else to add?
Yeah, it's often good to get templates too. Like from, say, a graphic designer to say, like, here's a template for Instagram. Here's a bit of is it GUI, a GUI kind of style thing for Facebook or anything like that allows you to, just hand off that toolkit, like an activation kit. And you can request that kind of stuff. It's more expensive, but it's going to keep the brand consistent across the board.
And it will help people who are trying to do things on their own, right?
Absolutely.
Who aren't going to have a big team to support them.
Absolutely.
It's like meal prep, right? It lets the rest of the week go a lot smoothly.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
You just want to stir fry, hot and fast at the end,
right? This brings us to our next. So we kind of talk about establishing it, but now talk for a moment. We have brand. We've already established this brand. We need to grow. We need to change with the times, as we were talking about in the beginning. And Michelle worked on modernizing the brand for Morton Salt. Michelle, you want to tell us some of the key things that you were thinking about when you successfully did this?
Yes, thank you. So in my work in design strategy, I'm a market researcher, and for 15 years I zigzagged around the country. I was a focus group lady across every household brand. And I was very, very fortunate about 10 years ago to join this Morton Salt redesign team, one of the quintessential American brands, and a huge responsibility for my colleagues at Pause for Thought, who asked me to be on the team. And so, everything that we've been talking about comes into play here. upfront mood boards, thinking about the range of color blue, looking at all kinds of iterations of the Morton Salt typography with the objective of balancing tradition and modernity. You don't mess with Morton Salt, right? They're not going to do a Chobani and go completely revolutionary. They're going to maintain all of the trust that people know them for, but yet make sure they're relevant with the times. And so we did that market research. We came up with probably 6 different platforms with 2 or 3 iterations within each, and we explored these various elements to eventually come to this updated girl, just slightly elevated, like getting a fresh haircut, a little kick in the step, a little hemline lift, a little twinkle in the eye, and bringing back actually the folklore of When It Rains, It Pours. So this was the final character of the girl. And then if you go to the next slide, you could see, the commercial application of it. Morton Salt is not only in table salt actually, but pool salt, Epsom salt. So it was a huge project, as you can imagine. But you could just see here, all the opportunity to clean up this line and to really focus on the key benefits, and then also to make it much more shoppable. So I think this demonstration of, the before and after, in particular for sea salt, and show you just, how some smart focus and planning on what is this product. You only have a split second at the shelf to make a decision, or now online, right? Putting it in your Instacart. And letting her shine, giving the trust of the brand, and then focusing on what it is, the sea salt. So this is a very big brand, but entrepreneurs here in this room, your brand could become the next Morton Salt someday. So all of this work is it's important, it's magical, and you never know what that next sea salt brand will be, for the next 100 years.
The big thing too about all this, which is great, is that if say you're a small brand that even that's been around for 10 years, you've been around 10 years. So there's things in your logo, there's things in there that don't be afraid to go back to. Like using those things, those are what, people love you for a reason. And those, it keeps some of those things alive, or even bring back maybe things that you did in the past. That's key. I mean, when I worked at Crispin Porter Bogusky, that was our thing. I mean, we brought back Burger King, we brought back the King. We made him really creepy, but like the King was a thing back in the day, right? By the way, the King, and you're wondering why he's creepy, it's because we made him a little bit like George Bush. So look at him again, and that's true. So if you go back and look at him, you're like, what? Oh, because he was the president at the time, and the King kind of looks like the president. And so, but things like that, bringing that back. Same thing as Domino's, bringing back the Noid now for kids now to see this little crazy guy on the screen, just using all of these tools from the past. Volkswagen, we brought back the Bug, the black Bug, and we had them talking back and forth. It's like taking things from the past and what you have and what people remember you for, and then reusing them again in a more modern way.
And that's triggering nostalgia, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're
again, it goes back to what you're saying, trust.
Feelings in this, right?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, no, this is all, at the end of the day, this is all emotional. I'm only going to see your stuff for 3 seconds. Can you make me smile? Can you make me laugh? Can you make me angry? Whatever you want to do. Get something out of me, or else you're just wasting money and you're just going to be next.
Absolutely. What about, we're going to start to wrap up because we're a couple minutes over. So if there are any questions, please let us know. We'll try to address them. But what about personal branding, right? So someone very said recently, personal branding is what you want people to say about you when you're not in the room. Mine probably needs some help. So how would somebody who is trying to create a brand based on themselves and want to, I don't know, you're a chef and you want to be a cookbook author and you want to do some sort of media work and you want to transition all of those things. What do we need to think about in terms of personal branding, or does all of this just apply?
I just thought of one that is very Dom friendly and kind of funny at the moment. Look at Martha Stewart. I mean, Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart is, a brand, a mark, a lifestyle, and for the years has always kept with the time. I think when she first started, it was extremely aspirational, somewhat untouchable, and Martha Stewart's magazine, Martha Stewart Living, helped you have this, fabulous life and creating, all these arts and crafts in your free time, right? And, cooking. It was kind of the next Julia Child. But, through time and as she has gotten older, she's become so much more accessible, and now she's hanging out with Snoop Dogg, So,
Digital actually helped.
right. I know. I mean, my gosh, personalities really have to be careful in these days. But she's pulled it off. And she has a wine now. She has a Chardonnay, Martha Stewart Chardonnay. It's just incredible.
I think personal branding stuff. Yeah, personal branding stuff definitely is where you have to think about scalability of who you're going to be. So say you're a small person and people in your town love you, right? Great, because they know you, right? They know what you stand for, and being true to yourself, and then letting that come out of your brand. That's great. You know you. So do you, and that's great. Put your name on it. Here's where it can go bad. Say your brand and you want to become big. You start scaling and scaling and scaling. Well, people are going to want your time, and you're not going to be you as much anymore, right? And if something bad happens to you, Papa John's, that's a big problem. Now that can also be an opportunity because it's so bad you can do the opposite, which is what they're doing now, which is good, and maybe rebound from it. I don't know, time will tell. But I mean, you are putting a lot of emphasis on you as a person, and that can be great. But I think when it comes down to how do you want to scale, if you're going to franchise, I would definitely think about that a lot, because now your time, you are going to change with it too. So it's tough.
So then the only key there, and where I see it then, is authenticity. Authenticity is a really big word for me. I think it's really important for us all. But if you are authentically you today, and then you're authentically you in 5 years, then that is the one thing that becomes your through line, right?
Yeah, sure. And that's where social can come in really handy. Social has a lot of access to everybody at any point in time. So being authentic on there, we can see that evolution over the years if I want to follow you versus the old days,
I think also thinking about it in terms of what's timeless versus what's right now. Like, as the person in town that everyone loves, what do they love about you that has to do with them? And what do they love about you that will still exist when you're Martha Stewart? And thinking about how does this touch on like deep psychological human things like archetypes. Like I think about that apple, going back to how the apple had these kooky stripes in it, and now it's a glowing white apple. Thinking about like the tree of knowledge and the person who took the bite, like that's kind of the essence of it. Whether like that, how that person looks will change from the 80s to 2022, but that spirit is still there.
And I think it's okay. Sorry, Penny.
No, good.
I think it's okay to name your company your name. A lot of entrepreneurs do that. But another choice is to come up with a brand. It's really a choice. It depends on what you want to stand for. Richard Branson decided to create Virgin, and Virgin now, is one of those quintessential brands, colors that you recognize right away, the red, and they have Virgin, Atlantic and cruise lines, experiences, etc. But it's always Richard Branson behind the brand. So, Martha Stewart put her name right out there. Everything's a choice. Everything's okay, but everything's a choice.
And on that note, we have taken up an hour and 15 minutes, and I want to be courteous of everyone's time. So this was fascinating. You are all amazing. Thank you so much, Jordan Buntain, Michelle Lawton, and Jill Peterson. You are all incredible. We're going to send a recap and I'm so sorry, I got a text, it distracted me. We're going to send a recap and contact information for everyone on the panel. Thank you so much for everyone who took their time out of their day to join us for this lunch session and to support LDNY and our entrepreneurial programming. I hope that you're all a little bit inspired and that there was some actionable information that you can take to your business right now. LDNY is a 501c3 organization that works to empower and to educate. We strongly encourage participation and donations. to help us to continue to offer a program like this and to provide the scholarships that live at the core of what we do in this organization. Our next roundtable lunch session is going to be in May, and it's going to cover the ins and outs of sales channels. We're looking for dates, and you can keep a lookout for the final registration coming up soon. We'd love to hear from you about any topics that you're interested in, how we can be of service. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, great ideas for future programming, or to let us know how we can support your entrepreneurial journey. Thank you, everyone. This was wonderful, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you,
too.
Penny.
Thank you.